So, dear participants, welcome to our South America event series, and thank you for choosing the room Biomass, Uruguay. My name is Arife Erkan. I am Associate Partner and Head of Corporate Services at Rödl Partners South America. Today, I have the pleasure to guide you through this workshop. So in Uruguay, the energy sector and especially the renewable energies are receiving special attention. The country is a global leader in the field of renewable energy and is known for its energy policy that promotes renewables with important incentives. Renewable energy sources in Uruguay include solar, wind, hydro, and biomass. Today, we will discuss especially on biomass as one type of the renewables. Therefore, I'm very pleased to welcome today Dr. Jorge Martínez Garreiro and Mr. Horacio Pintos to give us insights on this important topic. Dr. Jorge Martínez Garreiro has been researching and teaching at the Uruguayan University of Engineering for the last 30 years. He has also worked in the field of renewable energy in at least 25 projects in Uruguay and South America, such as biomass, biofuels, wind, and photovoltaic. He has extensive knowledge in the field of renewable energy, and therefore there in particular in biomass, and has also extensive knowledge of what is being done with biomass in Uruguay today, as well as what can be expected in the future. Welcome. And we have also, thank you. And we have also Horacio Pintos. He is a lawyer with 30 years of experience, specialized in taxation, both in Uruguay and abroad. He has participated in various events to promote business in Uruguay. He has advised numerous industries with business projects in Uruguay, including the energy sector. As member of CSU, he's part of the GPSA in Latin America. Jorge and Horacio will now give a presentation on biomass as a renewable form of energy in Uruguay. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them via chat at any time during the presentation. And after the presentation, we will have a joint discussion session where you can also address your questions directly to the panelists. Jorge and Horacio, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ari. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here and share some information about biomass in Uruguay. So let's go ahead. Please, next slide. We begin our presentation showing you our matrix in Uruguay, energy matrix by source. Here you can see an evolution in the last 10 years of our matrix. Our sources are hydraulic, biomass, oil, and wind, and photo. As you can see, wind energy will be important from 2013. About this year, increase our electricity in wind. So it's growing and growing in the last 8-9 years. Biomass is growing also in our country. Electricity fluctuates. This depends on rainy years or dry years. Perhaps you can see 2012. It's a year with a dry year, so the oil consumption rise. This is fluctuant. And the topic I want to comment is all renewable energy in our country is about 60–65%. This is a huge number. The average in the world is about 12%, and in Germany, it's about 45–46% in this year. So our country, it's a real global leader in this area. Next, please. let's focus on biomass. What are the resources or sources of biomass in our country? Well, residues are about 70%, mainly black liver from cellulose mills. Also, we have rice husk and sawmills residues. This is the main important sources. Firewood, it's 25%. We like to make a lot of barbecue and domestic uses, and many of our industry boilers use firewood as a source of energy. And last, we have 5% of biofuels, mainly biodiesel and ethanol. This is our biomass world here in Uruguay. Next, please. So we'll focus on electricity generation. I will show you a few numbers in the 2020 year. Here we have wind is about 50%, biomass about 10%, sun, thermal, and hydraulic. As you can see here in 2020, it's about 93% of our electricity generation is renewable. Said a few moments ago, out of water remains that in Germany was 51% of renewable in the energy generation. But let's see what happened in 2021 in the next slide, please. Here, fossil oil is rising because this year we have a very dry year, so not much rain in this year. So you can see here that the percentage of thermal or fuel consumption rise to 21%. This is an exception, but it's what happened when you have a very dependence on hydraulic energy. Next, please. And then we will focus on electricity from biomass. Let's talk a little bit for that. These are the players in our country who produce electricity from biomass. As you can see, you have two big players, Montes del Plata and UPM. Both are cellulose mills, so both are very important. Both produce about 70–80% of all the generation. And then you can see about 5 or 6 small players that generate between 2 and 7% of the generation. This is Horacio will talk a little bit about this difference between big players and small players in biomass generation. Let's see another one, please, another slide. I will show you one day. This is the 13th of May. As you can see there, we have all the energies in the electricity generation. Of course, at 4 a.m., there's mostly wind, but I think that's the demand. But as you also see, about 8 a.m., photovoltaics begins to produce energy. But hydraulic takes place, and when you have more demand in some ways, especially in this year, we have to use petroleum to thermal generation. Next, please. Well, what are the resources of biomass in our country? Let me show you this. Sorry, this is in Spanish, but just to take a very quick look, we have different sources. Industrial residues, they mainly are from rice husk, black liquors from the cellulose mills, and residues from salt mills. This is the most important residues in our country to do biomass. We only have agricultural residues, even some energy crops, mainly for produce biodiesel and methanol, and also to produce firewoods. So if you are planning to use biomass, it's very essential you know where is the biomass concentrated. Please, next one. You have three concentrated resources in biomass. Black liquor, but black liquor are from the cellulose mills, so you can't use it. But you have rice husk and sawmills residues. So these are the two potential residues more important for your options. Next, please. Rice production in Uruguay. Our country produces about 1,002,000 tons per year, about in the last 10 years. Our country is a small country, but it's the seventh exportation country in the world at these days. So this is a huge quantity of rice husk to take into the biomass production energy. Now let's see at last our another one, please. Well, sawmills residues. You have about 15 sawmills between small to big players, and this is our very important residue in our country. So this is my last slide, I think. I'll leave you with Horacio, who will talk you the legal aspect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for participating in this conference. I will try to briefly explain the legislation in Uruguay that affect the biomass electricity production and distribution in Uruguay. Please, let's go to the first slide. Well, first of all, we should note that there is no organic legislation in Uruguay regarding the renewable energies, nor biomass in particular. This is not necessarily a drawback, but in general terms, cohesive legislation on certain topic makes it easier for a country to establish long-term goals and strategies. As we shall see, this lack of organic legislation has not prevented Uruguay from applying state policies. You should know that Uruguay held a long-standing tradition of state monopoly in the commercial generation and distribution of electricity. This was partially changed in 1997, and such change made it possible for the private sector to lead the complete change in the Uruguayan production matrix, which was developed during the second part of the first decade of this century. And is still an ongoing process, of course. I will not enter into the boring details of all the laws, decrees, and rules, but if you must retain just one piece of information regarding the Uruguayan regulatory framework, it should be this. Production is free for anyone. Energy for autoconsumption is free for anyone, but distribution is done by the state company UTE. So while you can make a company to produce electricity, you can only sell it to third parties through, let's say, restricted and regulated channels, ultimately controlled by the state. Although, as I said, there is no code or single legislation that regulates the renewable energies as a whole, there are several regulations that refer to the different sources. In our case, biomass, the main body of regulations are not laws, but decrees, and were all approved in a short period between 2006 and 2010. In 2006, the government instructed UTE, the state company, to purchase energy from providers producing such energy from wind, biomass, or small hydraulic centers. Later decrees, up to 2010, made a fine-tuning to the original regulation of 2006, as we will see later on. In the third part of this scheme, you will note that there has been a back and forth movement on the legislation between 2015 and 2017, which may cast a shadow of doubt regarding the possibility to install a medium to large electricity plant from biomass in Uruguay. But on the other hand, the door is still open, and Uruguay has also a long-standing tradition of respecting the rules of the game in the long run, which is shown on the last part of this chart. Uruguay has a law for investment promotion with important tax incentives since 1996, and its refinements over the years have been only to give further guarantees and access to the benefits based on objective parameters, rather than the sole criterion of the authorities. It's more based on objective criterions. An exemption of income tax, for example, equivalent to 40% of the investment, is automatically available for projects until 2023. And otherwise, even better deals could be obtained through the general regime of investment promotion. So back to square one, we can say that although there is no organized code or body of legislation in force specifically for biomass, there's a state policy started rather slowly 25 years ago, and efficiently fueled, if you allow me the expression, with the help from the private sector since 15 years ago. And the future of this process does not seem to depend on the color of the government. Next slide, please. Well, going specifically to the biomass regulations, here's what we have now. In general terms, UTE is encouraged to sign special agreements for the purchase of energy from the private sector producing electricity from biomass. This general mandate results from a decree of 2010, but this criterion was applied already before that year. In more concrete terms, according to a decree of the year 2006, with its amendments and complements up to 2010, a biomass electricity provider should have a production capacity of no more than 20 megawatts, but at the same time, UTE cannot buy more than 10 megawatts to any given biomass electricity production plant. The above limits do not apply to the cellulose industries, who can sell its exceeding production of energy to UTE with a limit of 80 megawatts in the case of Montes del Plata and 220 megawatts in the case of UPM. This was what Jorge referred to in his presentation, that there is definitively a difference between the big players and small players in the country. Therefore, the conclusion is that the system supports small projects for independent industry, and the perspective for future projects on electricity from biomass will depend on the capacity of the country to export more energy and the possibility for the private sector to export directly without going through UTE, something which is already a reality and available in many cases. Regarding biofuels, law of 2007 and regulated in 2008 established two main advantages. First, the possibility to commercialize the product directly in the market outside the state monopoly, which is something very important because the monopoly on the production of fuels is another sacred cow of Uruguay since 90 years ago. But no less important is a broad tax exemption, which includes an income tax exemption for 10 years. This is something that should be welcomed for an industry that has high volatility in its production potential. Before going to the next slide, I would like to note that there is still a part of the biomass energy production that has not been adequately addressed yet in Uruguay, which is the solid urban waste. A law from 2019 intended to be a keystone in the regulation of waste disposal in Uruguay, but it has not directly tackled the energy issue. And this is still unexplored land waiting to be conquered. So a few pilot projects are ongoing, like Las Rosas, for example, but still not sufficient to make it a tendency. We hope this will change in the near future. Next, please. Well, let's talk a little bit about the regulatory framework. Again, we are not entering into the details because it would need a presentation, a whole presentation by itself. We will give a brief glimpse. A law from 1997 and regulatory decrees up to the year 2002 established the separation of roles within the state, which is a very healthy structure. The business activity is under UTE, already mentioned, while there is a regulatory body, URSEA, a wholesale electricity market, and an administrator of such market, and a dispatch regulator. So it's 5 different key players. Since there is no free distribution of energy within Uruguay, it is usually admitted that in Uruguay we have a free access to compete for a market, that's it, to sell to UTE, but not in the market. As already mentioned, there is in force in Uruguay a promotional regime for investments, which include the business of renewables. And except for the specific exemption on biofuel, there is no preference for any type of renewable, and the market and strategic conditions decide which one will prevail in the long run. But since UTE controls distribution and transmission of energy, the conditions to ensure a truly competitive market are somehow difficult. Having said so, several advances have been made over the last years on transparency. For example, tariff rates are published very clear by UTE. And on the other hand, it's difficult to know the sources for its costs, and information considered basic in many other countries. Therefore, this is an obstacle to evaluate the efficiency of the systems. The regulations are in place, don't get me wrong, but still are not widely applicable or applied by the state. The good news is that UTE makes long-term contracts, usually 20 to 30 years, where the prices are clearly established and guaranteed. Besides, spot prices are publicly available, and also free access for all the agents. As you may guess, Uruguay has a small internal market, so whenever the country produces something, it first looks for opportunities outside. Just to have some context, Uruguay has 3.5 million people and a GDP of 56,000 million euros, which makes it the 80th world economy. In this context, it is hardly imaginable that we are going to expand the market internally. There may be then 2 realities to consider, one for the external market and one for the internal one. When I mean when I speak about external market, I'm thinking about regional market, of course. So this is an ongoing process, as we shall see. In summary, the regulations are adequate, but as with many examples, the rulings do not change reality by themselves. A complete transformation of the energy sector, it's still on its way. There's interesting opportunities, as we will see in the next slide. Next, please. Next one, please. Thank you. Well, regarding what we can expect in the future, On October 2019, the country reached its peak of energy exportation, up to that point at least. 54% of the renewable energy generated was exported, 54%. Coming from a country that regularly imported expensive energy up to 13 years before, it is quite a feat. All this was possible due to a good policy, of course, but also because of the growing participation of the private sector. As we saw before, there is a limit of what you can do in Uruguay with energy. You can generate it, but you cannot commercialize it, except through the state company UTE. However, since 2016, private companies were authorized by the government to export electricity directly to Argentina. So we can expect this tendency to grow and be more fluid over the time, considering that 2019 marked a record in the export of electricity to the neighboring countries. There is still a lot to do, but we envisage only more opportunities in the near future. And biomass is a big player in the country, as shown by Jorge. When you saw the figures presented by Jorge Martínez Garreiro, you may have noticed that biomass is already a big part of the pie. So why are we saying here in this chart that biomass is gaining momentum? Hasn't it already got there? Well, what we mean to say is that with all the potential the sector has shown and the acceptance it had so far, it is time to find new opportunities, solid waste, for example. We think new initiatives will be warmly welcomed by the government. And finally, we would like to stress two key points. One is that there is a policy in Uruguay on all matters related to renewable energies, which is not dependent on the changing political preference. This asset is not at risk at the moment, and we do not envisage it will be in the midterm. And second, the big project on a centralized biomass production is on standby and not abandoned. So the opportunity is still there, waiting for creativity to catch it. Hope this will be a reality in the short term. Well, thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Arif. Thank you.
Dear Jorge, dear Horacio, thank you very much for the great insights on the market and also on the legal framework. Now I would like to start the discussion round where we will start addressing some questions of the audience to the speakers. So dear audience, please, if you like, you may open your cameras, or if you prefer, only your microphone, and also ask your questions directly to the speakers. But if you want, you can also send your questions via chat. And as we're waiting maybe for some participants to open the camera, I would already like to address one question to Jorge. How do you see the future of renewable energy in Uruguay? Jorge, if you could like to answer.
Well, talk about future is always a little bit uncertain. Renewable energy in general will be growing in our country. We don't have oil. We have to import all the oil we need. So we have many opportunities, and we will be growing in renewable. I think it's solar energy, in biomass, in wind. Perhaps we are having the bet to expand our transportation by electricity. So we have to need biomass background to support expanding electricity demand. So I hope that we will grow in this area. That's all.
Thank you very much. And Horacio, do you think under the new government in place since 2021, a radical change in legislation or renewables may occur?
Well, I actually don't think that the changes will result from the change in the government. As I said, there is quite a stable state policy on renewables. So this has been accepted by all the political parties. There is a multidisciplinary committee in place in Uruguay, and with the participation of all the parties. So I indeed see some changes coming to make the market more flexible, particularly for exporting energy. And it's also possible, I don't know how likely, but possible that it will also be flexibilized for the internal market. There are already some initiatives in place, for example, for private companies to sell exceeding production directly into the wholesale market. So I think changes are going to come to open more the internal market, although I think we can expect this from any government in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to address a last question that I have here from the audience to Jorge. Do you think there's still business opportunities with the biomass energy production in or distribution in Uruguay?
Well, I think so. As one of these opportunities will be the one Horacio mentioned, is urban residues. This is a challenge for our country. We are still waiting for investment in this area. So this is one opportunity, and I think soon we'll do it. On the other hand, in biomass, I can see two main opportunities fields in growing. One of these is in the electricity generation. Electricity demand increased about 5% year. So we need more generation, and biomass is one of the possibilities. The second one is that when you burn biomass, you produce a huge amount of CO2. So we have opportunities to capture this CO2 and to produce many different products, things, let's say, methanol and other compounds that will be green in our future, and will substitute fossil sources from this production. So this is the 2 or 3 main opportunities and developments I see for our country. Thank you.
I would like to add something. There is still pending the complete transformation of the transport sector in Uruguay, which will switch to electrical in the next 10 years, to be conservative, but probably 5 years. So this will imply a huge need of electrical of the electrical consumption, internal consumption, and we still seem to have a lot of capacity to export energy to Argentina and Brazil mainly. So I see there is room for more players.
Great, thank you a lot for your for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences on renewable energies and on biomass in particular. And dear audience, we hope we could answer your questions. And for any unanswered question, please feel free to contact us by email. And dear Jorge, dear Horacio, if you do not have any further comment, we may close our workshop for today. Thank you all for your participation, and have a blessed afternoon or evening wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thanks to all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.